Okay, so in the last, oh, first my cat's sitting on my lap, so you may hear like cat cleaning sounds in the background, and I apologize. But so in the last tutorial, we got to this point where we had this beautiful face projected on this object, and we talked about some of the basics of what UVs are and why you want to unwrap things and just sort of the basics about projection. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and we're going to actually take a more complex but still simple object and go ahead and try and unwrap that manually so that we can go through and have more control over what we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to make a cube again, but this time I'm going to go ahead and copy that cube and paste it. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to have these two cubes be offset from each other a little bit, but intersecting, right? So your scene should look something like this. The specifics aren't important as long as you have that point of intersection in there, right? This is still a simple object, but it's definitely more complex than what we did previously. And we're just going to bool these two together. So we need to go over here. We're going to go grab our bool, wherever our bool went. I probably just went right past it. There it is. And we're going to make both of these children of the bool. It doesn't matter which one's on top because we're just going to unite them, right? Right now, that one's being subtracted, but if we select the bool object, change A subtract B to A union B, and then the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure we check mark select single object. And the point optimization should be fine for what we're doing. We don't actually have any edges that line up and touch really, so it shouldn't be an issue. Okay, so we've got this. So let's go ahead and right click on that and go down to make editable. And when we open this up, we should have this cube 1 plus cube or something similarly named as a polygon object. You'll see it has generated a UV tag. And we can just pull this out of the bool, and then let's just delete that group. There we go. Okay, so now let's go to our UV edit mode. So in UV edit mode, you're going to see that our UVs now look like this, right? And if I go into polygon mode and I start selecting these, you're going to see that they're all overlapping on top of each other, right? Which isn't what we want. Let's say we want, specific icons, illustrations, hand-painted stuff, whatever it is, on each surface of these cubes. And so we want this to be completely unwrapped so we have control over each and every surface. So we could potentially go through and do projection and things, and it would probably be actually really successful. But we're not going to do that right now because what we're going to try and do, and sorry, I need to reset this back to the default real quick. Because what we need to do is we need to learn how to unwrap something. And so the general way that this process works is that you try and figure out what edges you want to cut and what edges you want to act as essentially like a hinge, right? And so, right, if we think about just like a standard cube and how the projection turns it into a cross shape, right, we want to do that same thing, right? So if I was to, say, start here on this cube and come around, I want this, let's say I want this to fold up, right? I'd want to cut that edge, and cut that bottom edge, right? So this will fold up flat. And then let's say I want these to be like the wings or the arms of the cross, right? Well, I definitely would want to make a cut here and here, along with the one that's there. So, but then this would be a hinge, so it would fold flat. Same on the other side. And then if I work my way around, right, these would be cuts, but I'd want this to be a hinge. I'd want this to be a hinge. And then, right, there'd be cuts down here as well. So how do we do that? It's reasonably simple. It's tedious and kind of annoying, especially when we get more complex models. And we'll look at some of those examples in a bit. But when we're doing some of the basics, we can get there pretty quickly. So let's go to edges mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to want to select the edges that we want to cut. that we want to use as edges to cut along. So I'm going to use my live selection tool. Now I want to make sure, and sorry, they call it the brush selection tool now. I'm going to use my brush selection tool, and I want to make sure that visible only is checked. I don't want to be accidentally selecting edges that I'm not noticing when I'm doing this. So the first step is, right, I need to select all, like, you know, all of this edge and this edge, right? Because this is one of our flaps. We want this to fold up and be flat with that top surface. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select that edge, this edge, this edge, that edge, and this edge. All right, so now you can imagine this would hinge along this edge, and it'd be kind of like a flap or a door. Okay, so let's work our way around, and we'll start on this side because it's closest to the camera. So now what I want to do is I want this to be hinged up to that top surface as well. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to add these two edges, right? So then you can imagine this side folds up this way, this side folds up kind of towards the camera. Now I'm going to go ahead and rotate around to the other side because it's easy to get confused and honestly to forget things. So we're going to go ahead and select all of those edges as well, right? So we've got, so that can be its own flap. Oh, and remember I said it's easy to forget things, right? I left this one here. And what I may do is I may intentionally forget an edge or two, or deselect one so you can kind of see what happens if you make a mistake and what that mistake and what the result is and how that and what that indicates when you're done. Okay, so let's see here. So then let's see, this would fold along this hinge and a fold along this hinge and then be flat as well. Okay, so that one's good. Let's go ahead and try and add our second one on. Now we could, it might be a really good choice at this point to store this selection, because if we make a mistake or deselect something on accident, it might be nice to be able to go back to this. So I've got this selected. If I go up to the select menu at the top of the screen, or wherever it may be in Windows, somewhere up high, I go to select, and I'm going to go down to store selection. And when I do that, you'll see I get this edge selection tag, and note that I have two of them. This is the one from the bool. We don't necessarily need that right now, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one just so it's not confusing. And this is edge selection. I'm going to say, we're just going to call this the cut edge selection. Right now we only have half the cuts we want to do in here, but what's nice is we can update it. We can add to this. So we're going to go ahead and have that selected. I don't think we will need to have it selected until we're ready to add to it. But let's kind of do the same thing. We're going to go ahead and say, okay, well, let's have this be a flap that folds out, and this will be the side that we're aiming for everything to be aligned with this time. So I'm going to select here, select here, select here. So that one should be free to unwrap. And then let's see here. If we do, we're probably going to want these edges. Oh, no, that's the wrong edge. Sorry. All right, oops. I'm going to hold down Control to deselect that. So what we're going to want here is, right, we want these edges to fold out and be square with this. It's usually good to figure out, like, what side do I want to have be the flat plane and the end, and that can help visualize the way to do this in 2D space. So I'm going to go ahead and select this edge here, and I will select this edge here as well, right? So that folds out as a flap along this hinge. I'm going to go ahead and rotate my camera around. I'm going to go ahead and grab both of these because it's the same. And then if I rotate my view down below, this is another place where I'm intentionally going to leave, right? I actually want to select one of these edges. Oh no, maybe I did all the selections I needed. Oh, I do have an error here, but let's go ahead and see if I can fix one, get one of these right, and then the other one will be wrong. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. So I've got all my edges selected, so I'm going to click Update, and you'll see the count goes up to 19. That's good. That means that it currently has all the edges I want. So now that I've made all of these edge selections, what I want to do is, there's a couple different steps you can go through here. Sometimes it's useful, right, to go to this Set UV from Projection. And what you can do is you basically have your camera view here, and what you come over here and you change that projection type to frontal. If I click on this, what that's going to do is it's going to generate a new UV tag. So this is just something to note. If I go ahead and click on this, watch what happens, right? Now I have 2 UV tags, right, on my model. That's not necessarily ideal. We're going to go ahead and delete that unless you're using it to apply different materials in different ways. But we're going to go ahead and delete that. We're going to select this other UV tag. That is important. We want to make sure that's selected when we're working. Okay, so we've got our edges selected. Now, unfortunately, if I come down here to relax UV, you'll see I have this option, and I think yours might say pin border points and not have this selected. But if I try to use this, nothing happens, right? It doesn't work. And that's because the first step I need to take is I need to unwrap this. However, if I click UV unwrap here, what happens is that it doesn't do what I want it to do. This could be very useful in certain cases. However, what it does is we don't actually know which one of these surfaces is which on here, and that can be really confusing when we start to try and put textures and things on top of that. Whereas the way that we're trying to cut these and unwrap it, it's going to make more logical sense to our brain that at least these are all connected and this is where they're connected to each other. And so, so I'm going to undo that. And the way that we get around this is the first step we need to do is go to set UV from projection. If I click on the gear next to it instead of just the button, what it does is it opens up these settings. And in these settings, there's one thing that you want to make sure that you uncheck for now is use polygon selection, right? In our case, we want the entire model to be unwrapped. And there's certain cases, which we'll look at later, where it makes more sense to do it piecemeal, especially if it's a more complex model. So we are going to uncheck that projection type, and we want to set the projection type to frontal. Frontal basically means it's from the point of view of the camera. And so if I go ahead and hit OK at this point, I should get something that looks something like that. Now, something that is important to note is that I want to have this UVW tag selected when I make that change. If I do not have that selected, if I click off of there somewhere, and I go ahead and say set UV from projection again, and this time I'm just going to click on it. What it's going to do is it's going to create a second UVW tag, right? And it's not going to be applying it to the original one. And then this can get really confusing because you might have this one selected and you're trying to make changes and it's not working. Right, because if I select back to here, they're going to look the same right now. So we don't want to do that, right? So I'm going to delete the tag that I just created. I'm going to make sure I have this selected when I'm doing these other steps. Otherwise, things don't work out so well. Okay, so now if I go ahead and just click on this gear icon, I want to make sure that these settings are set the way they are set. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now you'll see, right, if I've done everything correctly, these are unwrapped and unfolded, and I have these 2 islands that are cross-shaped. And this is going to be much easier to texture than the previous example. So we've got that set. Okay, so with this model, there's a couple other steps that we need to take. First, these are at an angle, which isn't really helping us out very much at all. It'd probably be a lot better if they were oriented, vertically, and if they were doing that. The other thing is, right, this is a lot of wasted space down here, right? We want, when we're doing textures, right, we want the faces of our object to take up as much of this space as possible to give us the highest resolution on the surface of our object as we can get. And so obviously if you're doing something for a video game or like you have a very specific criteria for like, low resolution stuff, something that's lightweight, that's a little different. But still, you would want to maximize the use and then just use a smaller texture in general, right? You wouldn't want to only be using, 2,000 pixels out of 4,000 and have all those other ones that are just sort of dead and empty. like my soul. Okay, so let's go ahead and select the polygon mode, because then we can double click and we could connect these two islands. Now I want you to note that, right, because I missed one edge here, these two islands are connected, right? This edge is actually a hinge, and it's kind of cool that we can unfold it and have it still be one piece and it's all laying flat. That's pretty awesome. But that's not what we want, right? We want these to be separate. So because right now, rotating it, scaling it, all of that's going to be problematic, because it's going to take up more space this way than it would if we can align them in a different orientation to one another. So what I need to do is I need to go back and I just need to say, oh, let's set UVW from projection. I'm going to go back to edges mode over here. We're going to come down here and we're just going to say, oh, this is the edge that I forgot. And I'm going to go ahead and select this and hold down. I'm going to hold shift, select this, add that to my selection. And then if I go ahead and click UV unwrap, now I have these two independent pieces, right? And again, right, they're kind of aligned strangely and off to one side, but they're there and they're separate. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and undo a couple of these steps. Let's go back to, there we go. This is all the way back to where I, first made that mistake. I'm actually going to separate this, but I'm going to delete one of these other edges because I want you to kind of see what kind of shapes come out if you make a bigger mistake. So I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to deselect one of these edges here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on UV Unwrap again. Right? And so now you can see I have one that is squarish and uniform in shape, and I have this other one that's all stretched and warped and strange. Right? And so if you are working and you're expecting a result like this, and you're getting a result like this out of something that should be a rectilinear object, that means that all that means is that you've forgotten to separate one of the edges. Now, if I go down here and I hold down Shift in my texture editor view and I select that edge, I can click on this UV unwrap again, and it's going to do the right thing, right? This was the edge that needed to be deselected. Now, sometimes it's really hard to determine that from what we're seeing in this view, and it's much easier to do it in 3D view. But in this case, it's a pretty simple shape. I know I can select that edge and then click UV unwrap, and they'll be unwrapped. Okay. So let's go ahead and rotate these around and move these and make it so that they fit better. Now, there's this option here called UV packing, and geometric is the form we're going to use. You'll see that there's this target resolution of 1024 by 1024. Let's go ahead and make this 4096 by 4096. Now, it shouldn't really matter because right, they're both square dimensions, but it's something that can make that it's good to just think about and can make a difference, because then what it does is there's this gap size. What the gap size is how much space there should be between two UV islands, right? Each one of these is considered a UV island. And 2 is really tiny. That's like 2 pixels, right? So in our case, depending on what brushes you were using and how you were planning on texturing this, you would probably want substantially more. I'm going to set this to 100. For our case, because we have this 4,000 pixel by 4,000 pixel thing. If I go ahead and hit apply on this, right, I'm going to get these two things. They're still at an angle, however, but they're larger. They're still scaled correctly. That's great. We have preserved the orientation, which is a default setting. And so let's go ahead and uncheck preserve orientation. Let's go undo, and then let's apply this again. Right, so now it's flipped it and it's actually filled in more space. However, these are still like not aligned great. It would be awesome, specifically since I want to be doing straight lines and things. I may want these to be rotated. I may want to rotate these so that they're vertical in the plane, even though I'm going to lose a little bit of space with that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to polygon mode. And I'm just going to start with one island. I'm going to double click on it. And I'm going to move, I'm going to double click on it. Then I'm going to go to the move tool. I'm going to drag it over, and it doesn't matter if I'm off the texture for a bit right now. This is just so that I don't have to deal with these overlapping. Now I'm going to use the rotate tool, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate this. Now they have some straightening tools, but in certain cases it'll work really well. In other cases it will not. So we're just going to kind of manually go in. And I found that if you can get it to be close to the edge of your texture, right? So you have a straight edge basically. It's a really simple way to make sure that's rotated accurately. So now I'm going to go to this other island. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that as well. And it may not be perfect right now, so I'm going to go ahead and use the move tool. And again, I can actually already see it's like slightly off, but I'm going to just go ahead and pull this over close to a straight edge, go to rotate, click and drag a little bit until I am perfect. Okay, so now that I've got these two rotated, now I can use the move tool and I can start to manually place these on my thing, right? So this is one of those things where, right, what's nice about the way Cinema has implemented UV editing is I can either manually or automatically place things. And sometimes automatically works great. Other times doing it manually gives you the control you need to get the result that you want. And it's really powerful that both things exist. This is a perfect moment to save our scene, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this UV demo, and okay. All right, so we've successfully unwrapped our first object. In the next section, we're going to take what we've unwrapped and we're going to look at different options for how we can then apply a texture to this and put things in certain places, either using the built-in body paint software, which not a huge fan of and am not good at using, or Photoshop, which I'm very comfortable in. And then we'll also look at Substance Painter as well as an option, because it's kind of the big hitter right now in texturing. And if you're a student, should be able to have access through the computer labs to Substance Painter and Photoshop as well. Okay.